It seems like every few years, a popular influencer gets injured while maxing out, triggering extreme reactions not only from fans, but also from other content creators. The general consensus becomes, maxing out is dangerous. You should avoid heavy singles if you don't want to tear your pecs on the bench press or your biceps on a deadlift. Just look at all the injury compilations. Do you want to be next? Do you want to end up like your gym hero? If only he hadn't ego lifted. If only he had stuck to higher reps. If only he realized that maxing out is just testing strength. Unfortunately, this belief is widely accepted by a niche group that is completely unlike you. The idea that maxing out is dangerous is a game of telephone gone wrong, perpetrated by those who are enhanced to the gills. What you need to understand is that these influencers are not like you. They never were. Physically and mentally, they're coping, trying to draw you into their world and discouraging safe and effective training because they can't handle it. The reason why they can't, but you can, is that their muscle growth has outpaced their tendons. If you're natural, your muscles and tendons grow in sync over time, especially when you balance strength training with bodybuilding. You also see red flags early on. If you are to get injured, the overuse would have been noticeable well beforehand. The idea that maxing out will randomly cause a career-ending tear is highly unlikely for the vast majority of you. I'd even say 99%. The fact is, in the natural world, full muscle tears, where the muscle ruptures off the bone, leaving you purple for months and requiring surgical reattachment, are rare. It's much harder to do than these steroid users would have you believe. Not only because the weights you lift won't compare to theirs, but also because your strength progresses slowly and steadily. Even if you don't max out often, the worst that's likely to happen is your strength display ability won't be there, and you might get stuck under the load, but you're not going to get torn up. It saddens me greatly that every few years, a popular influencer like the Trend Twins gets injured, and the comment section is immediately flooded with novices confidently saying, "See, that's why I don't max out. It's clearly dangerous. How many more cases do we need before the world realizes wonder maxes are just unnecessary ego lifting?" Of course, most influencers in this degenerate fitness industry are enhanced, so they make response videos in agreement. With their large followings, what do you think they'll say? The same recycled garbage. "That's why I don't max out. I told you so." Naturally, they can't max out because they'd get hurt too being on PEDs. So they all band together. A small group that overrepresents projecting their weaknesses onto you. And you fall for it every time. Meanwhile, real naturals like myself, who've been in the trenches, maxing out for literally a decade straight, have to step in and undo all the damage. But unfortunately, our voices aren't loud enough. The natural community doesn't have the reach of the steroid community, which has created a game of telephone gone horribly wrong, never starting with us. So the myth that maxing out is dangerous keeps getting repeated year after year. And I'm so tired of seeing it because it's simply not true. To add my own experience, I've been using the conjugate system and maxing out almost every week since 2014. That's 10 years of maxing out. Let's conservatively say I max out 50 times a year, though in some years I've done much more, often twice a week, factoring in lower body and presses versus pulse. So even with this lowball estimate, that's a minimum of 500 max effort attempts. And that's not even including the singles leading up to each max, since I usually do 3 attempts, just like in powerlifting. If you map it out, I've likely done over 1,000 heavy singles, and I bet my life on that number being 100% accurate. What I want to emphasize is that during this entire period, I've never been injured from maxing out. Not once. I haven't strained anything. Not even a micro injury. 0. The only times I've ever felt off were during rep work, which had nothing to do with maxing out and usually wasn't part of the same workout or even training phase. Once in a blue moon, this happened during hypertrophy phases due to minor overuse buildup over time. But when it comes to heavy maxing, grinding out slow, intense reps, I've never been hurt. And I don't think I ever will be. Not from maxing. If I do get injured, I can almost guarantee it'll be on rep work. And it won't be sudden. It will be the result of pushing through weeks of pain, which would have been my fault, likely due to bad programming with excessive volume and frequency, leaving me unable to recover. Just to say, when I benched 405 in 2021, my Medicare card was expired. So if I had torn a pec or shoulder, it would have cost me everything. The surgery would have been so expensive that all my hard work would have been for nothing. But I wasn't afraid one bit because I've never taken any drugs. Now imagine, I'd done so much maxing leading up to that point that you could argue I was at a higher risk. Plus being at the end of the phase, so I would have been close to overreaching. And we're talking about massive loads here. I'm benching 405, not 225 or 315. But guess what? It was a 3.5-year journey of specialization. So all the necessary adaptations occurred naturally. We're not talking about going from an intermediate bench press to super elite in a year or two, with the muscles clearly developing faster than the tendons. It's 100% realistic, equal slow gains. That's why the natural body is more resilient when pushing heavier weights. And again, during my recent shred, I continued to max out all the way down to 7% body fat on weighted dips, which stretch your pecs even more, and still no injuries. So let me bring this back to you. If you're an intermediate lifter, why are you so afraid? Do you really think you'll tear your pec on a 275 bench? Come on, it's all excuses. Now your counter argument might be one of two things. Either I'm some genetic outlier who's bulletproof and will never get hurt, even though at 17 years old, I was in far greater pain than I am now before discovering proper strength training methods, or maxing out isn't as dangerous as you've been led to believe, and you've been misled by frail liars. So tell me, is it a coincidence that all these injury compilations just happen to feature steroid users, while most naturals, including the OGs of the past, who max out regularly and stay injury-free, are somehow genetic freaks? Or is it more likely that steroids create an imbalance between the tendons and the muscles, increasing injury risk on 1-rep maxes? Which explanation seems more plausible? I've been rocking these badass hoodies for nearly every fall workout, and you'll keep seeing them this winter. Unlike the oversized tent look, these performance hoodies are tapered for a perfect fit, especially around the arms. And right now, you can get one for free with any order over $99 for Barbell Apparel's annual sale, featuring 7 new designs. It's a limited time offer and they sell out fast every year, so stack up as many as you want before they're gone. Also, my Leonidas shirt collection is back in stock after selling out. Huge thanks to all of you for supporting me and Barbell Apparel. I only wear their clothes given their unmatched quality, fit, and a lifetime guarantee. You can swap for a new size as your body transforms. No questions asked. So check my link in the description box, and much love as always. And on that note, if you do want to max out the right way, I must clarify that the conjugate system has been around since the Soviet era and has since been refined over many decades. I did not invent it. And when we look at current practitioners, not the original Westsiders who sacrificed the hard way, but the modern refined approach, we rarely see injuries from the max effort method. That's something important to point out. It's not just maxing out, bro. It's literally called the max effort method because it is a method designed to maximize your absolute strength. You haven't been told this because those who speak against maxing out haven't read the literature. They haven't studied the original textbooks like Science and Practice of Strength Training, which should be a mandatory reading for anyone in this industry. The fact is, maxing out is not only the greatest display of strength, but also a powerful builder of strength, forcing the slowest possible bar speed and optimizing intramuscular and intermuscular coordination. It is the most specific thing you can do to improve your maximal strength. If you want to get better at maxing, the best way is to practice heavy singles, as the form will always differ from submaximal singles. While submaximal work still has its place, I often program RPE 8 to 9, it's not the same, especially when using different specialty bars, where you need to refine your groove. Maxing out is school. It teaches you the correct bar path, showing you how to flare properly on the bench, exposing your muscular weaknesses, and mimics failure training. So it's laughable how so many lifters train to failure with high volume, grinding out reps like crazy, looking like they're about to burst a vein. They've got red eyes, are huffing and puffing, as if they're about to explode, releasing everything on the floor. They do this year round without issues, calling it hypertrophy work, building muscle through mechanical tension, yet somehow these same people have the nerve to claim that maxing out is bad or worse. It's clearly not. If you understand Henneman's size principle, which was established in 1957, you'll see that motor units are recruited in order, with the high threshold motor units activated towards the end of the set as you approach muscular failure. When you hit failure, or even when you're 5 reps away with it, say with a heavy weight, motor unit recruitment is high. You're pushing as hard as you can, and those reps are what drive growth. So if you're training with 0 reps in reserve, it's basically the same as maxing out. If you do 225 for 12 reps and your final rep is a slow as hell grinder, but you complete it, it's not that different from lifting 315 for 1 rep. Sure, the absolute load is different, but the mechanics and fatigue are similar, physically making you weaker. So irrespective of the load, it balances out. So it's puzzling that a lot of guys who follow, say, high intensity training principles don't realize it's a similar process and mechanism. A max effort rep is still an effective rep, just less efficient for hypertrophy since you'd need to do at least 4 sets of 1. In fact, I'd argue that high rep grinding can be worse due to the added fatigue, which wasn't present when maxing out, and that fatigue inevitably leads to form breakdown. When that happens, rep work can potentially be more dangerous. On the other hand, when you do a heavy max effort single, assuming you've selected the correct load, there's no prior fatigue. You've rested long enough after your last warm-up, and now you're perfectly dialed in. This will literally be your best technique. A smoother grind straight up and down like a machine. It's even safer than doubles and triples. You're less likely to get hurt, and for safety's sake, always have safety pins set up. If you can't lift that weight, you'll just get stapled, and that's it. But that's not the correct application of the method to begin with. Truthfully, you shouldn't be failing lifts at all. It's called the max effort method, not the super maximal beyond failure method. If you're failing, it shows you don't know how to max out. Like a gym bro who jumps in too fast. You should be gradually ramping up to your target weight, especially if you've never done it before. For example, if your target is 315 on the bench, you should do 225 times 5, 275 times 3, 295 times 1, 305 times 1, then 315. You don't just jump from 275 to 315 if you've never done it before. That's the caveat. Otherwise, you can skip the 305. Warm up. Follow powerlifting guidelines. 3 attempts with intelligent 5 to 10% jumps. Take your time and be confident in your ability to succeed. It should be more like 95 to 98% effort. And you don't have to hype yourself up like it's a competition. The idea that you need to sniff ammonia, have someone slap you on the head, or scream until you're deaf is untrue. You can come in calm, stay focused, and likely hit cleaner, more consistent PRs. You could hype up a little for your last attempt, but don't lose control. The goal is to ramp up to a respectable, locked-in single because you're so focused and the form is different during heavy max, combined with different muscle engagement, that it's actually safer. In fact, most people don't realize that at 90% of your 1 rep max, your triceps become far more involved on the bench press. We could even argue that 80 to 85% of your max carries a higher risk of pec strains than doing singles. Now, if you want to incorporate the max effort method into your workouts, it's not that randomly maxing out is bad, it's just inefficient if you're not regularly strength training. If you've only been doing basic hypertrophy work, you should run a phase where you gradually reduce volume and increase intensity, or at least get used to higher percentages, like doing lower reps in the 4 to 6 rep range. Alternatively, you could jump into the conjugate system, which is what I recommend, where you quickly get accustomed to maxing out every week. This way, you're essentially biohacking and can hit PRs every week indefinitely. That said, as a novice lifter, you should not be maxing out because you have a natural motor unit recruitment deficit. There's simply no point in doing so. In fact, it's even less dangerous for novices since they can't fully exert themselves, and there's less of a skill component involved in movements like the bench press. Let's be honest, the majority of guys claiming that maxing out is dangerous are benching 135 for reps, maybe 185 at the most. The absolute load is minimal, and even with beyond failure techniques like length and partials, they're not producing maximum force. They're not even at their peak, which makes their concerns about maxing out pretty ridiculous. However, if you've been training for a year or two and can bench 225 for a few reps, you're eligible to max out safely every week without injury. But for those benching 185 for reps and just want to hit 2 plates for a single rep, it doesn't really serve much purpose. You should focus on repping it for normal sets and reps rather than trying to hit a grindy touch and go ass off the bench 225, which is what most gym bros brag about and leads to a bad reputation of 1 rep maxes, and frankly, it's not impressive. So it's ironic that the largest group, most afraid of maxing out, is also the least likely to get hurt, compared to the smallest group of enhanced influencers who are the most likely to get hurt. So if you want to max out the right way, not just with submaximal singles, the best way is to max out weekly on different variations that are still close to the main lift you're trying to improve. Even if you're enhanced, the risk of injury does drop because you develop strength in all positions and build specific tendon adaptations related to overloading. Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell figured out this ultimate hack decades ago. The key to maxing out on the regular is to rotate the max effort variation every single week without exception. Even as a beginner, this can be kept simple, like keeping everything raw and just changing angles and grips, or switching from pause to touch and go. As long as you rotate in some reasonable way, you can get away with it. No exaggeration. This is exactly what I've been doing for a decade. We're not talking about hitting a competition lift every week until you get a PR. That's real ego lifting, and it does not work. That's not the max effort method. Anyone using that as an argument to claim maxing out is ineffective or dangerous is manipulating the facts. In fact, after 2 or 3 weeks of that terrible approach, you'll probably get weaker and run yourself into the ground, essentially beating your head against the wall, which anyone with experience in the method would have warned you about from day one. So it shows how little these influencers know. Instead, you should do no more than 3 attempts. Hit a small PR of say 5 pounds and then move on to hypertrophy work. The next week, rotate the variation and max out again. This constantly changes the strength curves and teaches you how to strain against a maximal load, which is a skill in itself. Meanwhile, your accessory lifts can stay the same for 4 to 12 weeks. You see, max effort training is not about perfect movement pattern specificity. It's about learning how to maximally strain using the primary movers. That's the skill you're training, whether it's for pushing or pulling muscles. It achieves the greatest intramuscular and intermuscular coordination with maximum motor unit recruitment from the very first rep, without the fatigue that comes from multiple reps. This is the best way to get better at 1 rep maxes. And the reason it works so well is because you're constantly rotating variations to override the law of accommodation, thus maintaining the ability to hit maxes at any time without peaking. So I've applied this approach to every one of my strength goals so far, and I'll keep doing so. And when I say changing variations, it's as simple as going from a regular grip to a close grip, from pause reps to touch and go, or from a straight bar to a specialty bar. You can also change angles, add bands or chains, or incorporate dead stop work, partials, and deficits. You're only limited by your imagination, so have fun with it. Just make sure you're not hiding your strength with weird movements that don't carry over well for you, which you'll discover over time. So I've been a broken record about this for so long now that re-explaining it feels redundant. How many times do I have to repeat? Strength is strength. Another point I want to emphasize is that this method gives you the most accurate percentages for back down sets or laying out your entire program. You don't need calculators, instinct, or complicated RPE, although there's nothing wrong with using those if you know how to. But let's be honest, if you've just maxed out in that session, you know your percentages are spot on, especially if you record yourself and can see there's nothing left inside. So when you hit, for example, 3 sets of 10 at 70% right after a heavy single, You know it's not 60%. It's right on target, allowing you to gauge intensity accurately. And if you progressively increase the load over a 3-week period by, say, 2.5% per session, your reps in reserve will naturally drop off, and you'll know when you start stalling. This method is essentially ascending RPE, but the numbers are based on factual PRs, not feelings or close estimations. This is incredibly useful if you don't fully trust yourself or prefer objective data, or if you just want to simplify the process. From a programming standpoint, I can't stress enough how effective hitting heavy singles is. You can't mess it up. And by rotating variations, you strengthen both vulnerable and strong positions, further bulletproofing yourself over time. Isn't that a much better message than claiming maxing out is playing Russian roulette? That's just fear-mongering. And I'm not here to push that garbage on you, especially when I know you could prevent injuries well in advance. So please, stop this defiled game of telephone and listen to what I'm saying. I've been screaming from the rooftop for years, and I'm done with it. Everything is documented. Go on my Instagram page, scroll down, check out the 100 maxes, the insane grinders, and of course, the B-roll footage across 1,000+ videos. And it's not just me. Any real natural who trains hard and maxes out with a well thought out system is unlikely to get hurt. One look at our community tells the entire story. Now compare that to the Trent twins, Ryan Crowley, Devin Physique, and all these other guys, especially when they're getting injured at such a young age. Don't you see it's the steroids? Come on. It's so obvious. How can you fall for these black and white ideas that maxing out is inherently dangerous? Hasn't the fear of injury been debunked enough when it comes down to exercise selection? Yet somehow, heavy singles without fatigue are the enemy? That smells like bullshit, because it is. Now, I am not saying everyone needs to max out every week, but it's certainly not a guaranteed ticket to Snap City. If you decide to test your max occasionally or use it as a tool for strength development and you're a real lifetime natural, your chances of getting hurt are significantly lower than you realize. It's nowhere near what steroid users claim. If they say there's an 80% chance of injury, I'd say it's the opposite. And even then, that's probably an overestimation. Realistically, the risk is more in the range of 1 to 5%, or in my sincere opinion, 0.5 to 1%. Of course, these numbers are just guesses, but the point is that debilitating muscle tears are the exception, not the norm. Especially if you're used to maxing out and listening to your body. Freak accidents rarely happen to lifetime naturals. In fact, if someone claims they do, it might be exposing them as a fake natural fraud. If they've really never taken anything, they should be able to test their max on command, or at least within a month, without ending up in the ER. Just saying. Here's the key. After maxing out, don't go heavy again for at least 72 hours. Avoid hyperspecificity by constantly rotating variations to eliminate overuse. This is an essential step. And of course, if your pecs are unusually constantly sore or you're getting weaker after maxing out, please take a deload. Do not push through the pain or rely on ibuprofen during max effort days if you know you're under-recovered. Use common sense. Stay away from dangerous drugs, and you'll find that maxing out is both safe and effective. And if you can't lift the weight, which shouldn't happen if you ramped up slowly, you'll simply end up on the pins. Done deal. I've been stapled many times at home and never once tore a quad or ripped a pec. No tweaks. That's not to say injuries will never happen. There's always a risk when you're lifting elite numbers, but by the time you reach that level, if you do, your tendons will be so well developed that the risk remains low, just like in the early stages. That's all I'm trying to say. Don't be a minimalist, max out the right way, and ignore the fear-mongering. It's always the enhanced lifters claiming the opposite message, that maxing out is dangerous. What does that tell you? Except that they're not like you. Or keep living under their cloud of fear. It's your choice. But now that you've heard a different perspective from someone who walks the walk, I hope you feel a little bit less afraid. Don't be like the masses, who are literally the least likely candidates to get hurt from maxing out.